Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along this Saturday afternoon. Well, afternoon for me. I don't know what time it is for you all are, but you are so welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Mairead and I am in the west of Ireland. So I've been involved in the TEFL industry for over 20 years now. So hopefully I'll be able to bring some of my experience and knowledge to you all today. Today's topic is really, really interesting. If you were here last week, we actually touched on it, and that was the importance of giving feedback and correction to our students. So today's webinar is going to be all about that topic. As ever, there'll be a question and answer session in the second half after the presentation, so please be ready to ask all of your feedback related questions. I can see we have a lot of early comers already, which is amazing. Welcome to you all. Later on, I'll take a look at where you all are, which if you've seen me before, you will know that that is my favorite part of the entire webinar. But for the moment, let's get going because we have a ton to cover. This is a pretty big topic. So our title, Feedback is a Gift. I love this title. A lot of times we can fall into the trap of seeing feedback and correction as something negative, like it's always somebody telling us what we've done wrong. But it needn't be like that, okay? In reality, feedback and correction, when done respectfully and tactfully, is indeed a gift. As you all know, and as you will know even more clearly when you start teaching, we all make mistakes, okay? And in fact, we want our students to make mistakes, okay? We want them to try and produce language and use new grammar, new vocabulary correctly. If they're not making mistakes, chances are they're not pushing themselves and they're not improving. So mistakes are to be embraced, okay? We welcome them. Errors and mistakes are an inevitable part of the learning process. Okay, they will happen. You all know this if you've ever learned a language yourself, or indeed if you've ever studied anything. You know that mistakes are inevitable. Okay, they are valuable because they teach us what we need to improve upon. So this is the mindset we need to go into our classroom with. Okay. We are a fan of mistakes. When we talk about feedback here, and notice I'm not saying correction because correction has that kind of negative connotation, right? I'm talking feedback, which incorporates constructive correction. It incorporates acknowledging what's done well. Okay. I like the word feedback instead of correction. So effective feedback should help students understand and retain information, okay? But the key thing is it should not reduce their confidence or motivation, okay? We never want to give so much correction that our students give up, okay? We don't want to break their spirit, ever, okay? So the idea is we want to offer effective feedback, but we never want to dent their confidence or their motivation. If we can find that balance of effective feedback, we can create a positive learning environment for our students. And that will result in a classroom full of students who are confident, who are willing to try things, who are willing to use new language, new grammar, new vocabulary, okay? As positive an environment as we can create, the better. And again, bear in mind that constant emphasis on the incorrect, can make learners hesitant to use English, okay? So always keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, we want to aim to create a positive learning experience, not to put anybody off. So how do we do this? Well, we try to correct errors in a positive and constructive way. Okay. We don't want to single people out. We don't want to make people feel silly in front of their classmates. Okay, that is the last thing we want to do. We want to do it in an encouraging, non-accusatory way. We also, instead of focusing on the negative all the time, on the incorrect all the time, we want to celebrate their accomplishments. Okay, if you hear them say something really good, give them a shout out, okay? Or at least let them know that you have heard, and, give them a thumbs up, give them a smile, give them oh, well done, okay? We want to take every opportunity we can to celebrate what they've done well, as well as offering them correction when they need it. Ideally, students should feel comfortable helping and being helped by their classmates. It doesn't always need to come from you as the teacher. We can rope in their classmates to support us and to support each other when it comes to either acknowledging what's done well or offering suggestions for improvement. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. Okay, so as I said, it's really important to find the right balance when it comes to feedback. And, that's easy for me to say, but in practice, it can be tricky. And, it does take a lot of time, a lot of practice. Yeah. With experience, you will be able to find that balance a lot more easily. So on one end of the spectrum, we have overcorrection. Okay. This is when we correct everything way too often. Okay. Perhaps we focus exclusively on what they've said incorrectly. It's demotivating, and students become reluctant to speak or use new language. Again, I'm sure all of you have experienced teachers who have done this to you. I know I have. And I think a lot of students go into a class thinking, oh, I want the teacher to correct everything because I want to, be perfect with everything. But no, that is not what students want. They may think that's what they want, but overcorrection all the time is a surefire way to dent their motivation. So, we want to keep away from the overcorrection side of things. By the same token, we want to keep away from the other end of the spectrum, which would be undercorrection. Undercorrection is when we do not correct our students enough, when we just let everything go. This is really frustrating for students, and the danger is that it can cause fossilized errors. Now, in case you haven't heard the term fossilized errors before, if something becomes fossilized, it means that even if the student is aware of the error, they can't change it because it's just become so much of a habit for them that they do it automatically. A typical thing with English language students would be maybe forgetting the third person S. So they will say, oh yeah, she go to school every day, or he have breakfast, okay, or he read a book, okay, even though the students will know that there should be an S, if that error is fossilized, they just will not put the S, even though they know they're meant to. It's just become so ingrained that they don't do it. So this is what we mean by fossilized errors. It's an error of habit that even though logically you know it's wrong, you are powerless to stop yourself from making it. These errors are difficult to get rid of, okay, if not impossible at times, and they can discourage learners. Believe me, I know all about fossilized errors. I lived in Spain for a really long time. My Spanish is, good, pretty good. It'd want to be after 10 years. But again, there are just a couple of such basic mistakes that I make, and I can hear myself making them. And it's just the most frustrating thing on earth. So, don't veer too much towards undercorrection either, because that does no real good in the long term. Okay, so, both overcorrection and undercorrection are as bad as each other in different ways. So you may have noticed that I'm using the word mistake, I'm using the word errors. I'm pretty much using them interchangeably. But this is interesting. Technically, mistakes and errors are not the same, okay? Even though we do tend to use them interchangeably. So just for future reference, mistakes are inaccuracies that students already know about and can self-correct. So for example, the error of he read, yeah, that's a mistake because the students know it's reads, okay? And if you stop and say he read, they can easily correct themselves once they think about it, okay? So that's a mistake. They know the information, they're just not doing it. And if you prompt them, they can correct themselves. However, errors happen when students are not aware of the language they're using and cannot self-correct. Okay, so maybe they're trying to be ambitious and use a new tense that you haven't really studied yet. Okay, or perhaps they say something like, I going to have a party tomorrow. Yeah, I going to. Now, you know that you haven't studied that structure. You know that they don't know be going to. So this would be an example of an error. They're using it because they're being ambitious, but they don't actually know the information. Okay, and that's why they're getting it wrong. So don't get too hung up on whether you say mistake or error. Yeah, just be aware that typically they do have their definitions, but a lot of people will just use them interchangeably. And I think we will tend to use mistake to cover everything. But yeah, it is a useful distinction for sure. So as you can imagine, errors, mistakes, call them what you will, they come in many different shapes and forms. They can happen in productive skills, such as speaking and writing. Okay. A lot of mistakes will come in productive skills. Yeah, because that's when the students are like speaking freely or writing about a topic. Yeah. But, you know, they can also happen in listening and reading. Like if they're listening and they know the words, but they just mishear them. Okay. Or maybe they fail to pick up on some sort of undertone. You know, or in reading, maybe they're reading too quickly and they skip some important information, or maybe they misread a word. So while most of the mistakes will come in productive skills, like speaking and writing, mistakes and errors will also happen in listening and reading. So be on the lookout. Another typical area of making mistakes is interlanguage. Now, interlanguage is the language the students will produce when they're trying out something new, okay? You know, they don't really know how to say what they're saying correctly, but they're trying, they're figuring it out. It's like that hazy gray area between what they know and what they don't know, and interlanguage is trying to bridge the gap. So as we said, we want our students to be ambitious. We want them to push themselves. So we can find a lot of errors and mistakes in that interlanguage phase. Also, a lot of students will translate directly from their own language into English. Like they will think, okay, well, this is how I say it in Spanish, so let me just try and translate it word for word into English. That rarely works. But, you know, I do not blame my students at all for translating directly from their own language because, you know, we use the tools we have. Whether or not those tools are correct is another thing. So there's a ton of potential for mistakes and errors. Okay, they will crop up everywhere. And as I said now, I think at least a dozen times, it is to be welcome. Okay, mistakes are welcome, they are valuable. We want them to happen because they show that the student is trying and pushing and, you know, willing to put themselves out there in terms of language. Now, the stage of the lesson can influence how we correct or give feedback to a student. Okay, we don't always correct in the same way all the time. Okay, it's very much stage or task dependent. So, for example, if we are doing an accuracy task, like maybe it's the controlled practice for a new grammar point, and we have given students a worksheet full of sentences that they need to complete with the correct verb form, that would be an accuracy-based activity. And typically, we would correct the target language immediately. So if, for example, our students are doing a gap fill on the present perfect tense, and we notice that they've made a mistake, we will tell them, Juan, look again at number 4. Okay. Or we might say, Maria, take another look at number 6. Okay. So, we will prompt them to look at their mistake and see if they can correct it themselves. Generally, we do this while we are monitoring. If you haven't heard the term monitoring before, this is when our students are busy doing something, they're busy doing a task, and we are walking around and looking at what each student is doing so that we can see their thoughts, we can see their answers, and we can correct them if necessary. Okay. So if it is an accuracy-based activity, like a gap fill, where there is a right answer or a wrong answer, we can correct it there and then. Okay. On the other hand, if it's a fluency-based activity, like if students are doing a speaking task in pairs, maybe they're talking about their holiday, or they're doing a role play about something, then we don't want to correct them immediately, because that will just cut their flow. It will interrupt them mid-task, and we never want to do that in a fluency-based task. So if it's a fluency-based task, we tend to delay feedback until the activity has finished. Okay, we let them talk, we give them free rein to express themselves, and then do the correction later. So this is why I say how we correct will not always be the same. Okay, it is very much stage dependent what approach we take. So when it comes to correction, and now I'm talking explicitly about correcting things that they have done incorrectly, self-correction is a powerful option. Okay, and really it should always be the first option we go to. All right. So for example, if students are doing an accuracy-based gap fill, and I'm walking around and I see that Juan has got number 4 wrong, I can say to him, just to Juan, I'm not doing this in front of the class because that would be embarrassing. I will say, oh, Juan, look again at number 4. Okay, why am I telling him that? Well, I want him to go back and look and try to fix his error. Okay, so this is what we mean by self-correction. It should be the first option, if at all possible, because it helps students retain the information and it helps create student autonomy. Autonomy here is another word for independence. So, it builds their self-reliance a little bit. If we can get them to self-correct, it's a wonderful thing, and we should always go to that option first. Okay. Especially if it is just a mistake and students can't self-correct. If it's an error and it's something that students don't know yet, then it's more complicated because they just don't know. But, it's worth a go. It's worth making them think about it. Another option, like if your students are working in pairs or in groups, you could resort to peer correction. So, for example, continuing our case of Juan and his number 4 sentence that he's got incorrect. If Juan is sitting next to Maria, you could say, okay, Juan, take a look at number 4. And Juan still can't, he can't self-correct. We could say, Maria, have you got any idea? Could you help Juan? Okay. So we're kind of passing the book to Maria. But again, only if we know that Maria has got it right. If Maria has also got it wrong, there is not much point in promoting peer correction, because it's like, both of them are lost and they might end up more confused than anything. So in pairs and groups, see if you can encourage them to correct each other. Again, though, in a positive way. We don't want it to turn into them trying to catch each other out or reluctant to make mistakes in front of their peers. Okay, that is not the point. That is not what we want. And if it descends into that, we can stop encouraging it. Okay, so, it can be kind of group or pair dependent. Yeah, depending on the relationship between the students and how well they will take correction from their peers. But if it works, it's a wonderful thing. Okay, so if self-correction doesn't work and if peer correction doesn't work, then of course we can correct them ourselves. All right, this would be teacher to student correction. I would say, though, try to leave it as a last resort, like encourage self-correction first, peer correction if appropriate. Okay, but sometimes we've just got to get in there and correct them. That is a totally normal part of teaching. We can't avoid it, nor should we. So obviously teacher to student correction is teacher-centered, like it's coming from you as the teacher. The problem with constant teacher to student correction is that it can discourage students' active use of the language and learner autonomy. So again, coming back to the idea of overcorrection, okay, we do not want to do that, okay, because it will dampen their spirits a little. It will make them less likely to try, which is absolutely not what we want. But there is definitely a time and a place for teacher to student correction, okay, as long as it's done tactfully, respectfully and constructively, there is nothing wrong with it. So here are some techniques we can use for correcting on the spot, like there and then. Imagine our student says, "People is happy." Okay, this would be a typical sentence you might hear in the classroom. People is happy. So you can echo or repeat. So if your student says people is happy, you say people is happy. Okay, so you're saying it incorrectly, but with an inflection and with a facial expression that indicates that it is not correct. We do this to prompt our students to self-correct. Because if I say people is happy, my student will probably say, people are happy. Okay, so we're prompting. Another thing we can do, we can request clarification. Okay, so again, my student says people is happy, and I might say something like, "Oh, are you talking about one person or 2 or 3 people?" Okay, because again, prompting them to think about the number, whether it's 1 person or 2 people, will prompt them again to self-correct and to think about it. Like they might say, no, 3 people. So I say, so people are. Okay. Again, facial expressions and body language are so important here. They are your best allies. So you might do a little like face, like kind of, do this, or with your hand you might go like almost. Okay, or okay, close. Yeah, so you'll be using your facial expressions and your body language to transmit to their students that they have made a mistake, but in a nice way. Okay, we don't want to be too overly dramatic either. We don't want to scare them with our grimace and with our no. But definitely employ your facial expressions and body language to convey to them that something has gone wrong. Some more techniques we can use for on-the-spot correction could be repeating the sentence until the error. So again, your student says, people is angry. I might say, oh, people. Yeah, so I will cut it off just where they made the error. And again, that will prompt them and hopefully they will come back and say, oh, people are. Okay. So we can also use contrasting. So again, my student says, people is happy. And I say, people is happy or people are happy. Okay, so I'm contrasting the wrong answer with the right answer. And then, hopefully they will listen out and say, oh yeah, people are. You're like, okay, good, moving on. So another thing we can do, we can use metalinguistic cues. So these would be like maybe telling them the correct grammatical term they need to use. Okay, so again, if they say people is happy, I might say, oh, think of the subject and the verb. People, plural. Okay, and again, hopefully they will say, oh, people. Okay, people are. All right. So yeah, you can always resort to like the grammatical terminology if the students know the grammatical terminology. Okay, that can be a great prompt for them to self-correct. Another thing you can do, if you have the information on the board, like if you were talking about people are, people being plural earlier on, you can go back to the board and say, oh, people, and then the student will see the correct word and say, oh, people are happy. Okay. So we have tons of options when it comes to on-the-spot correction. And, we will vary our approaches. Sometimes one will work better than others. It's very context dependent, but you have a ton of options when it comes to correcting your students on the spot. You'll notice in all cases, we have never just said, no, people are happy, okay? We have never said that. Everything we've done has prompted the student to self-correct. And that's important. That's a really good habit to get into. Now, if we prompt them to self-correct and they can't, then of course we can tell them, okay, you mean people are happy. Okay, but give them the chance to self-correct first. Or, ask their partner, ask their group. Okay. We want them to try to figure it out themselves first. Yeah, but if they don't know, tell them, of course. All right. Before we briefly mentioned fluency-based activities like speaking. Maybe they're doing a role play or a debate or a discussion. And I said that we never want to cut their flow mid-sentence to correct them. Instead, we typically do delayed correction. So a good way of doing this is by using the board, or maybe you have an interactive board that you can use. So while students are speaking, in a fluency-based task, I would walk around, listen, and anytime I hear a mistake or an error, I would write it in my notebook. Okay, I wouldn't say anything, I would just make a note. So that when the task is over, I will typically have a list of 5 or 6, or maybe more, mistakes and errors. When I get feedback from the task and when it's all finished, I will say something like, okay, while you were speaking, I heard some errors or mistakes. Okay, let's take a look. And I will write all of the errors on the board. And I will say, okay, everybody, with your neighbor, you have 2 minutes to see if you can correct these errors or mistakes. Okay. I really love that technique because, again, it gives responsibility back to the students to correct their own mistakes or errors. Okay, it increases their self-reliance somewhat. And then once they've had a chance to look at the errors with their partner, then we will do a whole correction, or we will do a whole class correction together. I really love this technique because, it avoids naming names, because all you're saying is, I heard these mistakes. You're not saying who made them. And, students appreciate that. Nobody likes being called out. Another thing we can do is we can record students' speech, okay, if we have their permission. So like maybe there are two students doing a task. You might say, okay, why don't you record yourself doing this task? And, maybe they'll take out their phones, they'll record themselves. And then after the task, you can say, okay, now listen back and see if you can hear anything that you could have said better. All right. So again, they are correcting their own mistakes. You can absolutely then step in afterwards and help them with stuff they've missed. But yeah, it's a really nice thing. Another thing, like if you have noticed a particular area of mistakes or errors that your students make, like maybe they always make mistakes with past tenses, you can get them to do some sort of writing activity that requires them to use past tenses. You're just upping their practice, and then you can give them written feedback. Okay, maybe some explanations. As always, though, you're also praising what they did well, as well as focusing on what they need to improve. So, in conclusion, I would say that learners need to see their errors in context to practice and incorporate them into their language use. Okay, so don't ignore the errors. All right, we may pick our battles and we may pick and choose our correction technique or our feedback technique, but we do have to address mistakes and errors. Okay, it is ultimately very helpful if done correctly. Praise and consistent feedback are a crucial part of students' progress. So now, there we go. That is my rundown of feedback and correction. So it is now over to you. Any questions you have about correction or feedback or anything we've talked about in this presentation, please pop them in the chat box. While you are thinking of your questions, I am going to go to the chat box and see where everyone is today. I already see some familiar names. So hello, Lawrence in the UK. You're not too far away. We have Cynthia in Oregon. Okay. Asigul from Germany. Wonderful. Anya in Parle. Very nice to see you all. We have Jacqueline in Rigard and Catherine in Belgium. We have Robbie. Hello, Robbie. You were here last week. We have Chantal in South Africa, Brazil. Oh, how wonderful. I can tell you, Geneviève, Brazilian people are like some of my favorite people in the whole world. They are just, truly the loveliest people. Like when I have Brazilian students in my class, I know it's going to be a good time. I know we're going to have fun and it's going to be a wonderful, joyful experience. Okay, we have South Africa, Andalusia, very good. I lived in Andalusia for a long time, in Cordoba and also in Malaga. So I have a lot of love for Andalusia. So Sumangile in South Africa, welcome. We have Astrid in England, just across the water. Emma, hello in Dublin. How are you doing? We have the UK, we have Florida. Hello, Eunice in Florida. We have Leicestershire and Esther in Toronto. Oh, fabulous. So we have our usual wonderful international mix. I love to see it. All right, so Rigard, let's go. We have a question and it looks like a good one. I just finished learning this yesterday. Amazing. That's good timing, isn't it? So it's still fresh. How important would you say it is to understand the learner's home language when teaching? Rigard, it can definitely help because if your student is translating, like that example I was giving you, people is happy. Like that is a typical example that Spanish students will make, because for them, people is treated as singular. So when I hear them say people is, I know, because I speak Spanish, I know that they're just translating. So it helps in that you know why they're making the mistake. But really, even if you don't speak their language, you will still do the same thing. Like you will still have to correct them. So it can help, okay? But really it's not necessary, because you will be using the same techniques regardless of whether you speak their language or not. Honestly, Rigard, I think I think in the long run, it can be more helpful if you don't speak their language. For example, when I started out teaching, I taught in Moscow for 2 years. I spoke no Russian. Well, initially, the first year, I spoke little to no Russian. And when my students made mistakes, it really meant that I had to go that extra mile to correct them, because I didn't know where the mistake was coming from. So I had to be like really, really rigorous and organized in terms of correction, which definitely led to me becoming a more effective teacher in the long run. And honestly, I think it led to them becoming better learners, because they knew they couldn't fall back on their first language for help. Okay. So, it's nice and it can be helpful, but it's absolutely not necessary. And you will do perfectly fine if you don't speak their language, because, the techniques are the same. All right, great question. Thank you. I know a lot of new teachers worry about this a lot. I don't know if any of you have been listening to our podcast. We speak about this in one of the recent episodes. Like it's a doubt that some new teachers have, like, oh, I don't speak Spanish, so I can't go to Spain, or I don't speak Japanese, so I can't go to Japan. Well, you absolutely can. It is not necessary to speak the language of the country you're going to. Chances are you will learn it though, and it will be super interesting and it will be helpful, but not necessary. All right, great question. I love that question, Rigard. Thank you. Esther, how do we do written corrections online? So online is really interesting, Esther. I mean, you can totally do it as you would in a classroom. Like if you're in a breakout room and you hear a mistake or an error, you can just, say to that student, prompt them to self-correct or use any of the techniques for correction. You could even do it, in the whole group, if you felt like your student wouldn't be embarrassed. You can, if somebody makes an error, you can ask all of the students, like, what do they think the correct way would be? But one of the massive advantages of online, Esther, is that you've got the chat box, or you've got like the message function. And I love that so much. I really wish we could have a chat box in real life. I mean, I know we have the board, but you're not always at the front of the class near the board, or you don't always want the whole class to get distracted by you standing at the board. So if a student makes a mistake that you don't want to correct in front of the whole class, you can just send them a private message, or you can write the incorrect version and then the correct version in the chat box. If it's only something minor that doesn't need too much detail, use the chat box and use the message function. Okay. Otherwise, though, in breakout rooms or whatever, in a one-on-one lesson, just correct them as you would in a normal in a traditional face-to-face classroom. Okay, so hopefully that helps. Let me know, Esther, if you would like any more clarification on that. All right. So Aysegul in Germany. I've heard that correct the mistake type of exercises actually consolidates that mistake, as it will stick in the student's mind more. How far do you agree with this statement? Thank you. Oh, yes. I often have this dilemma, I must admit. I think with some students, like who are really, visual learners, sometimes it can actually, even though in their mind they'll know they have to correct it, like the incorrect version will like burn into their brains. I would say for this reason, Aysegul, I don't tend to do these types of activities as accuracy tasks. Like I wouldn't do them in a grammar lesson, say for controlled practice, because I don't want them repeatedly seeing the same mistakes again and again. I would, however, use the correct the mistake thing just as delayed correction after a speaking task, for example, where there wasn't really any specific target language focus. So, if I'm doing delayed correction after a speaking task, there might be some target language errors if it's a freer practice, but there may also be some vocab errors, some pronunciation errors, some word class errors. So, there'd be a good variety of errors on different things. So yeah, I totally feel where you're coming from though, and I have some of those doubts about that myself. For that reason, I wouldn't use them as controlled accuracy practice, but I would use them as delayed. Also, it's a nice way to boost some student talk time, where students can, take a few minutes to discuss some errors with their partner and see if they can, collaborate and try to correct them. All right, nice. Good question, Aysegul. Thank you. And hopefully that made sense. Let me know if you would like any other clarification. All right. So Lawrence, hello. What is finger correction? So as the name suggests, Lawrence, this involves using your fingers to indicate mistakes. Okay, it works really well, especially for prompting a student to self-correct. So if, for example, let's go back to our people is happy. All of us will think that's correct. I've said it so often now. I'm really consolidating that mistake. So, before we said like that you can cue up to the error. So I might say, so 3 words, so 3 fingers. All right, I'm trying to keep my fingers in front of the camera. So I might say, people. And then I'll pause and like pull back on the second word just to let them know that that's where the mistake is. Okay. Or if they say something like, I been sick. Okay. I been sick. I might say, okay, well, what they mean to say is I have been sick, right? So I might say something like, oh, okay, so 4 words. I might say, I been sick. Yeah, and again, pause so that they know that that's where the mistake is and that's what they need to correct. So, it comes back to just using body language, and facial expressions just to, what would be the word, to back up what you're saying verbally. Another thing we use finger correction for a lot, Lawrence, would be pronunciation. So for example, if, let's see, let me think of an example. So say students are saying, they want to say the verb argue, but instead of saying argue, they're saying argue, they're putting the stress on the wrong syllable, like I argue. You might say, okay, so think about that word again. Oh, I might say argue, argue. So say it again. And again, we're using our finger, like we're pulling it back to indicate that that's where the stress is. Okay. So I use finger correction a ton when it comes to pronunciation and word stress. Okay. or maybe they put too many syllables in a word. Maybe they put in 4 syllables where it's only 3. Again, you could just use your fingers like da, 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 da. So yeah, I'm a fan, Lawrence. I am a fan of finger correction. You can definitely incorporate it, and it's a very useful backup to your verbal instructions. All right. So hello, Esther. What I was thinking of, how do I mark written work? Okay, I got the wrong end of the stick. How do I mark written work of the students? Do they submit their work privately or in the group chat? Where? So Esther, usually email. Yeah, email would be the best. Or what you can do, and I remember when I was teaching a lot, like when I was teaching exclusively online, all of the emails got a bit much. So I would make Google Docs, okay, for each student. So if you use the whole Google suite of products, that's an incredibly useful thing to do. So I would make a Google Doc for each student and then just like private message them the link to their doc so that they could, for homework or whatever, they could go into their doc, write their answer, and then I could see it. Yeah, it was all there. And I would correct it and they could see the correction. And it was actually quite nice because I would keep the same Google Doc like for months or for as long as I had that student. They would have their own Google Doc. Okay, and it became a really nice record of all of their writing practice and all of their corrections. So yeah, either give them a Google Doc and message them the link, or create an email address that is just like exclusively for work purposes. Check that you're allowed to give them an email address and they're allowed to show you their email address, because that's very important in the world of GDPR these days. And if everybody is cool with using email, use email. All right. So they are 2 potential ideas for that. Okay. So Ilyana, I like using Google Forms. It gives you a list of answer options that can be fun. Oh, nice. I've never used Google Forms, Ilyana. I will definitely make a note of it though and check it out. I'm always on the lookout for new stuff to help with online teaching. So yeah, everybody, check out Google Forms. Thank you, Ilyana. Great. All right. So we have time, guys. We have 10 more minutes. I would love to hear some more questions you might have related to feedback or correction. Okay. Or maybe you have more questions about creating positive learning environments. Maybe you have some specific questions about, online teaching in terms of correction, feedback. We have time. So I would love to fill that time with some more questions. In the meantime, I'm going to look back and make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, I think, yeah. Okay. Yeah, we have answered those questions. Okay, Ilyana, a further explanation of Google Forms. It gives you short answers, long answers, drop down, multiple choice. Oh, amazing. All on the same form, so you can mix things up. Oh, Ilyana, that sounds so fun. So like you can make worksheets, essentially, or like little quizzes. Oh, I love that, Ilyana. Thank you for the tip. I'm always looking for stuff like that. All right. So Chantal, hello Chantal, off topic, apologies, no problem. Where can I find the podcast? So if you are currently enrolled, Chantal, you will find links to the podcasts on your course dashboard. Alternatively, you can go to Spotify or Apple iTunes and you can search for TEFL Unlocked. Okay, I think we have 7 episodes now. And yeah, we release one every week. So yeah, the podcast is a lot of fun. So hopefully it will be useful for you. So yeah, TEFL Unlocked on Spotify or iTunes or on the dashboard for your course. All right. So, hello, Lawrence. How can a teacher correct a learner online during lessons? So, Lawrence, I spoke about this briefly in a previous question. You can either you can either do it as you would in a face-to-face classroom, because, you can still speak to the students and see the students and talk to the students in real time. So, you can absolutely use all of the techniques in an online lesson, just as you can in a face-to-face lesson. Or you can use the chat box, or you can use the messaging function if you don't want to draw everybody's attention back to you or back to the student who made the mistake. So yeah, all of the normal ways plus chat box or private message. Okay. You'll see, when you start teaching online, you will see that, you actually have just as much access to the students as you would if you were in a face-to-face classroom. Okay, with the addition of the chat box and message service. All right. So, Erin, have you ever had to teach second language English to students who live in your country? Oh, absolutely, Erin. So I told you all that I lived in Spain for a long time, but in 2015, was it 2015? Yeah. So 2015, I moved home to Ireland, and yeah, I've been teaching in a language school in Galway ever since, on and off ever since then. So yeah, I have a ton of experience teaching TEFL in Ireland. Okay, so that's really fun. It's really, really fun teaching students English in an English speaking country, because you have so many opportunities to go out on day trips with them, go to the supermarket with them, go to the local museum with them, bring in local newspapers, because everything is in English already. It's such a fun teaching experience. You have access to so much authentic material and English speaking situations that you do not when you're in a country that does not have English as their first language. So yeah, thank you, Erin. Good question. All right. So let me see. Did I miss anything? No. Okay. I think we have answered all of the questions so far. We still have another 3 or 4 minutes though. So if there's anything on your mind, please pop it in the chat box. I think as well, everyone, if you end up going to another country to teach English, that will give you such an insight into the challenges of learning another language. Okay. Honestly, I think every TEFL teacher should be required to study another language, just so they can put themselves in their students' shoes. Because, for example, as I said, when I moved to Moscow, I had to learn Russian from scratch, and it's really hard. It's really interesting, but it's really hard. And it gave me such an appreciation of my students who were, in the same position, just learning English. Okay. So you will learn so much by studying another language. You'll understand the mentality of your student when you yourself are the student of another language. So yeah, get learning languages, guys. It will improve your teaching so much. Okay, Lawrence, how can a teacher assist a learner who refuses to stick to correction? Oh, Lawrence, I know. It's hard. All we can do, Lawrence, is just be consistent. Okay. Unfortunately, we can't make them say things correctly, as much as we want to. All we can do is be consistent and constructive in our correction. acknowledge the things they do well, consistently correct the things they're getting wrong, in a tactful, respectful way. But look, ultimately it's up to them. Okay. So yeah, keep trying. But in reality, we can't force them. I don't know about you all, but I remember when I was at school, at secondary school, and maybe we had an exam coming up, and the teacher would always say, "Oh, you've got to do the work. I can't do this exam for you." You will find yourself thinking that all the time. You'll find yourself thinking, please just say it right. I won't be there in real life to correct you for this. So please do it. But we can't guarantee that they'll ever stick to it. We can just be consistent. All right. Thank you, Lawrence. That is a great question. Do you all have the expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink in your country? It's an expression we use a lot in Ireland, and it's so true. We can give our students all the tools and feedback in the world, but we can't make them actually apply it, unfortunately. Okay. And Esther, I taught art on Skype. Oh, amazing. Will students be willing to connect on Skype instead of Zoom? Possibly. I don't see why not. Esther, if you're working freelance, as a private teacher, you can use whatever platform you want. If you only want to teach on Skype, then your students can get Skype. Okay. And if they don't want Skype, they might find somebody else. Okay. So yeah, if you're working for yourself as a private teacher, you set the terms. If you want to use Skype, you use Skype. I would say though, do not be afraid of Zoom. Zoom is actually very, very easy to use. I was a complete newcomer to Zoom when COVID hit, and I found myself doing everything on Zoom, but you pick it up really quickly and it is very user friendly. So, if you want to do Skype, do Skype, but, be open to other platforms too, because it may just be that you prefer Zoom to Skype. We don't know until we try. All right, thank you. Okay, and Lawrence, which language will you recommend for me apart from English? Oh gosh, Lawrence, any language, like whatever one speaks to your soul, whichever one you want. All of them are equally valid. Like learning any language is just massively helpful, I think, for our brain, for our well-being, for our teaching. Like if there's any country, Lawrence, that you would really like to go to in the future to work in or to live in, why not just start doing lessons in that language? Or for example, if you start teaching online and the majority of your students come from, say, Japan, why not learn Japanese? Or if they come from Korea, why not learn Korean? There is no one better than the other, Lawrence. It just depends, what language appeals to you. Maybe I'm biased, but I think you can't go wrong with Spanish because it is, one of the most widely spoken languages in the world. It is by no means the most difficult language in the world. It definitely has challenges, but it's accessible. But, really, whatever speaks to you, Lawrence, go with that. All right. So with that, everybody, I can see that we have 1 minute left. So let me thank you all so much for taking an hour out of your busy weekend to spend with me today. It's been a joy as always, and thank you so much for all of your excellent questions. As ever, I will ask you to take just 2 more minutes out of your Saturday and perhaps fill in this short survey. We are always looking for your thoughts, opinions, and suggestions when it comes to our webinar. So if you could fill out this short survey, that would be amazing. I'm going to put the link in the chat box too, so you can get there a bit more quickly. Oops, spelling it correctly would be a help, wouldn't it? Okay. So all of our webinars from the past couple of years, I think at this stage, are on our YouTube channel. So go to the TEFL Academy YouTube channel. You will find all of the webinars there. As I mentioned, we also have our podcast up and running. It's called TEFL Unlocked, and you will find it on Spotify and iTunes. And just in case you haven't heard, next weekend we have a massive one-day event called International TEFL Day. We will be hosting a conference with a ton of experts from the TEFL industry. I will be there giving a talk. Some of my colleagues will be there giving a talk, and other leading lights in the world of TEFL. So in case you haven't seen any advertisements for International TEFL Day, check it out, register, and hopefully we will see you there. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your attendance, and I will see you all again soon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Goodbye.